So welcome everybody to Sessions panel. I am just beyond thrilled to be joined today by the great recording, touring, coolest dude, Shannon Forrest, who's joining us from Colette in France, where he's on the road with Toto. Shannon, thanks for joining us, man. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Paul. Great to be here. I really appreciate it.
And listen, I'm lucky because maybe not everybody's got the chance to see you play live. And we've known each other for quite a long time. So I was lucky enough to see you at Modern Drummer Festival. I was lucky enough to see you with Toto, but also with the Dukes of September. And we'll talk about that because that's one of my favorite gigs I've ever been to. You know, what we do with the sessions is we try and advise people on how to survive in the music industry. You know, it's a tough business and you've been successful and a survivor. But where did all that start for you? You know, what was I know you come from a musical family, but you know, how did music kind of enter into your life and how old were you at the time?
Oh, I was so lucky. My dad was a great musician. We lived in South Carolina. He had worked in Southern gospel music, and there was actually a nice facility there in Greenville where a lot of these quartets of that era, late 60s, early 70s, would record, including some of the Travelers Quartet, which had something to do with Elvis. You know what I mean? So there was some legitimacy to that scene. And my dad was this great musician, and he started taking me to the studio when I was 6 months old, you know. And he built his own place in 77 when I was 4. You know, I remember I would lock around his leg when he'd be going to work and make him take me with him, you know what I mean? And I just got to be in and around, even though it was kind of in a peripheral kind of town, you know what I mean? I got to be around the recording process, and my dad truly was a world-class musician. I was so fortunate to grow up with him. He gave me some particular words of wisdom, besides just the opportunities he gave me. You know, his perspective, and we can get into some of those things as we go. So music, it was just always around me. You know, I have pictures of me. He was an arranger, you know, and there's pictures of me at 6 months old with giant headphones on, sitting at a score, you know, with a reel to reel, listening to whatever it was he was working on. You know, it was a great environment, you know, for me. It was really fantastic. And I was very fortunate. I don't know if there's any resource that guys can go out and check out, but there was a drummer there in that small town, right when I was born, and my dad opened that studio for the first few years. A guy named Buster Phillips, who actually did some recording, but I'm telling you, that guy was a world-class drummer. I mean, like super unique groove street drummer with a ton of chops, you know. But I got to sit in the back of a tiny drum booth with headphones on when I'm 4 with that guy. And so I think just, you know, what was blasting into my bones, you know what I mean? It was a very fortunate early beginning, you know, and that was kind of how my early childhood went. And that's why I got so lucky. And, you know, every kid likes drums and they bang on pots and pans for a little bit, but I had a lucky environment where what it was that I liked about them, I was able to have a certain contact with, you know.
And did you take lessons with Buster when you got older?
No, I have had one lesson in my whole life, and
And
it
when
was
was that?
I was 16, and I was reading some things. My path, you know, is kind of peculiar to me. It's just like in the limited things I had access to in a particular way, and the really deep access to like recording and things like that. But I didn't take band, I didn't do marching, you know, none of those things. And because I was in the studio, I was always working with musicians that were much older than me, you know. And so the learned part of that, I didn't catch a drift of Buddy Rich and people like this when I was early developing. I was listening to records and I liked the way things felt. And so all that early development was just about listening and playing. And then I got to be around a couple of drummers. The other guy I spent a lot of time with was also became an arranger, so he's a very musical guy, you know. But my experience with the instrument started very simple, you know, and grew out from there. So by the time I got wind of a few things, I think what happened around 16 was I got wind of Omar Hakim, you know, and my dad. I think actually I went to PASIC and he played there. Uh, and I got to see him, and my brain exploded, you know what I mean? So I went and started buying all kinds of records that he played on. And I went to a guy, I didn't look very hard, but I went to a guy to get a lesson. And this is an assessment of where that guy was, not me. He just said, "Oh, I can't teach you anything." Now that doesn't mean that I couldn't be taught a bunch of stuff, but I just had sort of a failed first, experience with that. And honestly, for me and the way that I am, I think I was probably lucky because in that little period there, when I first started getting, aware of some of those things, Omar and then Dave Weckl and some other things like that. Even then, I found that the more I focused on trying to learn how to get my hands around those things, the less I liked about the way I was playing, even then. You know what I mean? So I just kind of wanted to play a groove and whatever. And then consequently, I spent way more time in the last decade practicing than I ever did in my early years.
Well, I remember hearing a quote from Pablo Casals once, who, when he was 93, was asked why he still practices 2 hours a day. And his response was, because I'm starting to see an improvement.
Yeah,
So,
well,
uh,
right.
hey, listen, but just because you didn't take formal lessons doesn't mean that the osmosis of what you were surrounded by didn't teach you, though, right? So, but even before Omar came around.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is important to any musician and the attributes that maybe I had naturally and the environment put on me caused me to develop in a certain way, kind of from a self-motivated place. And because I was around the studio and articulation and these things were and clarity and things like that were important, even though I wasn't listening to particularly complicated music or complex drumming, the necessary technique to make sure things balanced and you could hear them and they were clean, I didn't really know. I mean, I guess coming from where I'm from, there wasn't technique first. If you try to get better, you will develop technique and you'll find the same technique that everybody else found because when you try to do certain things, there's only one way to do them.
But, I think all that's apparent from your playing, though, right? Because one of the things that sets you apart is playing the perfect part for the song. And if you grew up in a studio where the song is king, right?
Yeah.
No one's interested in someone coming in and blowing chops over your song. So
Yeah.
you learned how to play the right part for the song just because it was surrounding you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, that's why I was drawn to Jeff Porcaro so much, because you can't find him in a situation in any recording that I've ever heard where he didn't sound like the right guy for the song. Did something magical to it. And so that was just kind of my take on it, just being able to interpret and play and find the right part to support a song.
Well, and I'm sure you've heard this throughout, at least the last 15 years of your playing, that no one is as close to Jeff as you are. And while I think that is a tremendous compliment, I want to say that you are close to Jeff, but you don't sound like it. You sound like
Well,
you.
no, I appreciate that. And I mean, what's one thing we can't talk about because when we talk about these other developing musicians and what's important, it's like, I made a big deal about how much I loved Jeff because I was out in this, you know, community that's two or three times removed. I was from South Carolina, which was one step removed from Nashville. And then I was in Nashville, which is one step removed from LA and New York. You know what I mean? And so I was always having to, I was just lit up by that. And there was no one in particular in the area that really lit me up like that did. So I was constantly, talking about it. I was constantly, if somebody had a record he played, I was, oh man, give me that. You know what I mean? It became this sort of association that I would get from people that wouldn't know Jeff if from a guy in the bar across the street. You know what I mean? But they knew the name and they like to say those kind of things. And so those things can kind of travel. And of course, a lot of the vocabulary, I aspire to try to play from a certain particular way that he played, but no less than, well, I just saw Manu yesterday and all these different people. It's just, Jeff just had a particular effect on me, especially early, and so it's just, and I don't think that's any accident either. I think there's certain, when we're drawn to musicians and artists and different things, you realize it's something about the person's nature behind the instrument that's what you're actually connected to. and the instrument just becomes the way that you experience them. And then there's those things that are similar within us that are draw us to each other, if you will. And so no, it's the ultimate compliment. And then there's the jazz side of things where it's the ultimate insult to be compared to anybody. If you can be too closely associated to someone, it's a real knock, you know what I mean? And it's never felt that way to me, but I've always felt and understood well that it's like, well, I appreciate that. And I'm still working on my voice, working on how to apply it in certain ways. And the Toto gig is when you're that close to someone's music, it becomes even more difficult to deviate, especially when a guy played for a song, you know what I mean? So it's like within Jeff, I thank you for what you said, because no, I mean, as much as I wish I could, I don't sound like Jeff. Nobody can really sound like anybody. They can remind you of someone, maybe, you know what I mean? And then there's a certain reverence that I also try to maintain, because I understand that his playing was as much compositional as it was just drums. He played things that were signature ways that you move from a verse to a chorus. They become hooks. He played hooks. That's why he was such a great recording musician. He made time a hook.
You said something profound, man, and I couldn't agree with you more. We play who we are, right? So
Yeah,
the way you play is a manifestation of who you are. And if you can do that, then that lends an authenticity to your playing, which is one of the things that you and Jeff have in common. You
yeah,
are both authentic to who you are. If we look at all our friends in the music industry, the ones that are successful and good, and we know their personality, you can see that personality in that playing.
sure.
There's a reason why Steve Ferroni doesn't play like Kenny Aaron, right?
Right.
And it's not because they can't,
Sure.
it's because that's not who they are.
Yeah.
Both magnificent, both
Yep.
awesome, but they don't sound like each other because they play authentically to who their personality is. And that's what you do. And I think that's what set Jeff apart. I mean, everybody knows how wonderful Jeff was. Everybody knows how gracious and kind and generous he was. And so I'm not sure his playing could have been different as long as he remained authentic.
Sure. No, that's very well said. And like I told you, I was so very few things, kind of hit my, what would you call it? Like that childhood button of just joy, and just pure joy. We get immersed and we hear so much music and experience so many things that those sensors they don't get numb. They just get, things become usual, if you will. And I got to sit backstage and watch Manu play, yesterday, and I couldn't stop smiling the whole time. You know what I mean? And you talk about a guy who's just authentically the way that he is perfect. That's because you can't sound like that. Nobody sounds like him.
I agree. Was there ever a time in your life when you were growing up where you didn't think you would be working in the music industry?
No, no, but it was more like I wanted to be a session player because I grew up in that room. You know what I mean? I wanted to be able to be in the conversation with music that I liked. You know what I mean? And David Hungate said something to me at one point, and he said so many things that were deeply impactful. And he's such an amazing, unique, singular bass player. If people don't know who he is, I mean, he's way more influential than people even understand. And he told me, he goes, and I kind of always felt this way a little bit about that. Well, I feel this way about the drums, although I'm having a different relationship right now with the drums than I really ever have. But I like music more than I like drums. And, David told me that, he played guitar, he played trombone. He said, bass was just the only thing I could play good enough to get in the room with the musicians I wanted to play with. It wasn't like bass was like he was dying to play bass. It was just, well, shoot, out of these things, here's where I can get myself heard and get in the conversation.
From that desire, that thought that you would never do anything else, at what point did you start a professional career? What was the kicker that made you say, that rendered that dream and those ideals a professional?
I was so lucky. Back to my fairy tale childhood. I had both feet in the door, even though it was on the periphery of the music industry. I always wanted to do that. I always, that, and I guess there wasn't a doubt about it because I was already doing it from such a young age. Like, well, I don't know, you've probably met him along the way as a bassist named Glenn Worf from
Sure.
Nashville, and he's played with Mark Knopfler. For example, the really fortunate kind of things that I had as a child was I've known Glenn. I played my first session with Glenn when I was 13. So when you have that going on, even though coming from where I came from did not help me, the knowing other musicians helped, but actually coming from the musical sphere that I was from was a little bit difficult to get beyond because there was a certain negative association sometimes to musicians that came out of that world where I was trying to go as a recording musician. So it was the musicians that I met on the dates there that helped get me onto the scene, with them, but there was no sort of professional connection that, or, like I didn't play on a project that led to one thing. I was just playing with these musicians and getting to know them over the years that got me those opportunities.
Well, I think it's often underrated how drummers playing with the right bass player
Oh,
can
yeah.
make you sound better, feel
Oh,
better. Listen, I
yeah.
was lucky enough when did the work on the John Blackwell project album, I got to jam a little with Will Lee. And
Oh,
I will
yeah.
tell you, I've never sounded better, ever.
Sure.
I was just
Yeah.
doing the same thing, but I've never
Uh-huh.
sounded better, and
Yeah.
so other musicians have that ability, if they want to
Yeah.
to help you
Yeah.
and make you sound better. I mean, I can't think of many bass players you've played with in your career that have not been tremendous.
The key people that I met early, I met Hungate when I was 19. Like I say, I had met Glenn when I was 13, and I played with a guy named Gary Lunn when I was 14, and a guy named Craig Nelson. Really, really, really great bass players. Once I started working a lot outside of my dad's sphere, there were some players that were kind of a drag. You know what I mean? I'm going, oh, this person rushes like crazy. I mean, Nashville did not have the highest standard of what was required to be able to play a date back then. You know what I mean? But the best cats there were certainly qualified, and that was why the ambition for me was to get to that record level in the Nashville community playing on records, not because I cared about playing on the particular artist. I did. I always appreciated the artist, of course, but I wanted to play with those musicians. So my goal was whatever got me in the room with Glenn Worf or Michael Rhodes or David Hungate. It didn't matter so much to me what the project was. It was just who I was playing with.
Now, obviously, being able to play the part, right? If you can't play the part, you ain't getting the gig. I mean, that's the truth.
Yep.
But working with those guys, once they know you can play the part, and once they got to know you that you're a great hang and you're easygoing guy, how did they help you take the next step?
Well, I mean, it's really there was all word of mouth and from talking to the Toto guys too, Luke it was all the same thing. We're all musicians, and when you meet a new voice that you enjoy, when you have the opportunity, because you do have to be, I feel like you're always compelled you must recommend when you find new blood and it's raising the level of something, you must recommend that person, even if your best friend plays their instrument. You have to do it. And I had some of that, help, along the way. They just wanted to play. They want to play with you. You know what I mean? If you bring something to the room and they're doing things, and there was enough work to go around. I mean, Michael Rhodes used to quote, a rising tide raises all vessels. You know what I mean? So it's you just have to do that. Eddie Bears helped me so much early before I even knew him off the recommendation of Michael Rhodes. So sight unseen, you know what I mean? He might have heard me on a demo or something, but Michael gave him the, hey man, get this, if you're going to recommend somebody, tell them to call him, and so I was. And I've gone out of my way to do the same thing. You have to. It's not even going out of your way. You just have to. If you like the instrument, if you like what you play and you hear somebody play something great and you can't make a date, you have to recommend that person. You have to.
Well, God love you for doing it. It's the right thing to do. So we mentioned right at the beginning that after some level of success, you got the gig touring with the Dukes of September. And for those people that don't know, I would tell them to go look them up immediately. But that was your friend Michael McDonald, Boz Scaggs, Donald Fagen, and a lot of guys from the Steely Dan band playing the music that they all love, as well as a couple of their own hits. How did that come about?
David Hungate. David was the one who put me in. Toto got inducted into Musicians Hall of Fame in 2010, I think, right around there. And when they got the opportunity to play and go be inducted, David told the guys that they should call me to play for Jeff, And I had met Luke once before, maybe, I don't know if it was 10 years prior to that, maybe, probably. But we never played together. We just hung out one night and kind of knew who I was. And so I did that. And then when I met those guys, I met David Page at that point, uh, and Steve Porcaro. So we had this moment where we had hung together. And then I was working with Mike McDonald through a whole other sort of trajectory of the way my fortune had gone. Michael was managed by the same company that managed Boz Scaggs. And they knew that I had done a bunch of work with Mike, and Boz was wanting to do some re-records of Silk Degrees tracks so he could have ownership rights for licensing. And so he got David Hungate and David Page already knew me. We came out to my studio. Now, I hadn't worked with Boz yet, but we had spoken on the phone and put this whole thing together one day in the studio with Boz cutting those tracks, and he made one phone call to Donald, and that was it. That's how I got the gig. And that was a year before it went down because there was something. Steely Dan went back out, but so Boz did that for me, but David Hungate was the guy that told the Toto guys about me. That guy, you know what I mean? So it's really, you can always pretty much trace these things down back to single impactful people in your career.
But isn't that the most valuable lesson? That it's all about networking. It's all about showing up on the day. It's all about giving your best performance at the best time and networking with the right people so that it can lead from one thing can lead to the next.
For me, I guess it was about more luck and opportunity because I was never. Now, just to be clear, because anybody checking out how to get their career started, I failed in a particular way because the networking thing, right? That I've just met David. We hit it off, and then just the genuine musical components of that made that happen. But I never went out anywhere outside of just where I was called. Now, because people ask me about that particular thing, how do you get your career started? Well, see, I didn't do that. And I can see how, I sort of painted myself into a particular kind of corner because I didn't realize actually a lot more opportunities come when you combine the professionalism of showing up and making the relationship, but then also, see, a lot of us are introverts, and I'm not so much an introvert, but I was never much for going out and hanging. Now if we're on the road together, it's a great hang. If we're in the studio together, it's a great hang. But after the gig's over, I'm not a hang kind of guy. And that it can be very important. You know what I mean? And showing up places and, networking, not to hijack the whole thing for a minute, but that is something that I feel like I did not put the appropriate amount of emphasis on that. I just thought it would all work on the nature of merit. You know what I mean? And it doesn't always.
Well, it doesn't, but it's the failures that teach us lessons, right? It's hard to learn from constant success.
Yeah.
But, maybe also the slightly introverted nature, helps with practice and focus. And
Sure,
frankly,
right.
the non-partying thing also helps with longevity and professionalism. So, you can portray it as a failure, but I would say looking at where you are now, maybe it's part of the reason for the success.
Well, no, and I appreciate that. And just real clear, we all have different paths to things, and I was very much focused on being a father to my kids. Not that other, and I didn't want to travel. You know what I mean? And as a result, when I would leave a studio date, I would go home and stay up another couple of hours with my boys, and instead of doing some of those things that would advance maybe your relationships with people, keep you in their mind even more, a lot of times people want to hang with people. They call them to play on their music because of the personal relationship, even above the musical relationship. You know what I mean? And that is important. And I have been reprimanded for not participating in that other side of things more. But it's never too late, right? And I understand it well now. I make myself get out of my hotel room and go places where people are going to be when I'm ready to go to bed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that staying true to yourself, though, that's all part of the authenticity of your playing. If you had to say, pick the proudest moment, the proudest thing you've done, the thing that setting aside, of course, being a dad, because I know if I ask you that general question, that's what you're going to say.
Yeah.
I mean, professionally, what's your proudest professional achievement?
Well, all these things add up to these moments. The Michael McDonald record that I produced.
And I was going to touch on that because you might be a magnificent drummer, you are, but you wear other hats. Listen, in today's day and age, everyone seems to think they're a producer because they have a laptop, but
Right.
you're an engineer and a producer and
Yeah.
somebody that knows their way around the desk, and that's a whole different thing.
The reason that that record as a drummer means something significant to me is not just because Mike is one of my favorite all-time artists and deepest friends and most influential people in my life. That record, because of the way it was made, it's cut to analog tape, right? And there's not a single punch in or edit on anything I played on that entire record. Everything is a take, and there's nothing, even in the programming. There's some tracks that have some programming in it. None of that stuff is quantized. It's me playing a drum machine to a metronome and looping it, and then I go out and play to that. It doesn't mean that this is the way that things have to be, but for a moment in time for me, it's the absolute truth. There's not it's completely unadulterated, What I say sometimes is like living and breathing for 4 minutes. When you hear that thing top to bottom, that was a moment in my life in sequence. You know what I mean? And that's and I'm not averse to editing. I'm not averse to punching things in or cutting takes together. I don't like quantizing and time correcting and fixing things, but that's just a personal thing. I think once you've done that, there's nothing left of the performance. So what is it we're listening to? But that entire record I'm really proud of that in a particular way for a number of reasons, but as a drummer for that reason, because it's unaltered.
Now, did you get to select the musicians that played on that record, or was it a collaboration between you and Mike?
It was both, a lot of the musicians I like because I came to them through some experience with Mike or whatever, but there were some times where I pushed him to invest in the idea of getting Marcus Miller, who he had already worked with, you know what I mean, going, hey, no, he'll do it. Call, let's just work it out, and making those calls. So that record was a really great experience because I got to work with so many Branford Marsalis and Tom Scott and, Marcus and Michael Landau. And, I mean, it's just a bunch of A-list guys. So it was really great.
My suspicion was going to be that that's what you were going to pick as your
Yeah.
proudest moment. That's what I was thinking because, it's easy to get complacent over your success as a drummer, even though you shouldn't. And
Yeah.
none of us should, but it's easy to get complacent. But when you step out the box and prove that you can do other things and do them to the highest caliber, I think those are the things that we often are the most proud of.
Right now, playing with Toto, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, that's still like you can't really get your head around that. You know what I mean? And so it's hard for me. You would put that right at the top, but I'm not satisfied with what I'm doing. I'm still working on that. You know what I mean? So you know what I mean? I'm not going to sign off on any. There are some really great things like the DVD from 2019 or 18 with Toto. I'm really proud of that, in a particular way. But there are all kinds of there's YouTube videos of performances with the band that I'm really proud of, you know what I mean? But they would be like a rabbit hole of going, but those are moments, and it's not it's a live moment, you know what I mean? And so I can look at that back and go, man, that was a good one, and those things represent something at a very high level. I'm proud that they're out there.
But I think one of the things that makes the Toto gig so interesting is there are a lot of bands touring that have been doing it for 40 years, that had a lot of success in the past. And now they go out and they play those songs the same way they ever played them. You can step back in time and imagine you seeing people in, 1985. But Toto are nothing like that. They still change arrangements. They still change dynamics. They still play new songs in a new way.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
well, it's got to be much more interesting for you being in that environment.
Yeah, and any time, and the people ask me about, well, what's your favorite song to play or and all of it, I mean, anytime you can sit back and play something of Jeff Porcaro's, it's like the ultimate opportunity to cover something, you know what I mean? The moments that really yield a different sort of a benefit are once we get outside the arrangements and we're into the solo sections and any vamps and anything like that, that's when the thing switches over into, I own that, because that's different every night. And it is great. And Luke and the guys are so particularly driven every night to deliver something. They're wanting the same thing, much like jazz musicians, they're always chasing a moment. It's like, where can we get to tonight? How much of that can we get, in the set? You play the whole show for a particular reason, but the Toto thing's unique because some of that other thing is built into it, something that's coming more from that performance, what's it going to be tonight kind of situation where you can't treat Rosanna that way. But you know what I mean? You can't constantly be reinterpreting the song. You're going to lose the audience. That's not what they came to hear it. So, I focus on making sure that's feeling a certain way every night. And that's the different kind of place where I focus my energy as a player anyway. It's like every note of that and where the band is. I'm constant. I'm not just playing it, waiting for the chorus to hit. I'm listening to everyone and making sure that we're sitting in a certain pocket. And that can seem like it's just not deviating night to night, but that's a concerted effort to make it deliver the same way night to night.
So, as a Jeff fan and as a Toto fan, and I'm just imagining this from my own perspective, how deep and profound was your inner smile the first time you played Rosanna with those guys when it sounded great?
It was probably the one opportunity for it to live outside of where it has to live when it becomes an ongoing relationship. It's a one-time thing. I never had any expectation that it would happen again. Hearing that kind of around you, uh, it was, like, wow, I can't believe this is going on. And then right behind that is going, oh man, everything I loved about this was Jeff Porcaro, and it's not going on right now. You know what I mean? So it's a real juxtaposed kind of thing that you realize, and so then you quickly have to get on the level of, well, these guys are about who am I and what is it going to be when we play together? But maybe that first time there, because there was no sense that there was going to be another, so you could kind of get caught up in your own path, if you will, and go, wow, this is something. But the bigger moment with that, I would say, was when we played Europe, our first show in 2015, and I come on for that tour, and I kind of was in this interim position in 2014. We had this big curtain that was up, and this white curtain, and it was the first night of the European run, which was a big tour. And I'm looking around, and in that moment, it kind of just stood off that it was like, that's not Steve Lukather that I know. That's Steve Lukather that I always wanted to play with. And that's David Page, and that's Lenny Castro. You know what I mean? There's like a minute there where you see it a particular way, and then the thing drops and you're just playing.
Yeah, I've seen the video. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I can only imagine that would be just a, lump in your throat moment till you get used to it.
Yeah. I tend to be real hard on myself and I don't get caught up in, you know, it's like every day is just a reset, a reset. You got to do better than you did yesterday. You know what I mean? But that was one of those moments that kind of pops out and you go, hey man, dig where you are. You know what I mean? Yeah, you can beat yourself up after when the gig's over and start beating yourself again. But that one, it wasn't even of my own doing. That one sort of snapped into focus and go, hey man, check out where you are, you know?
But that's a really good point because complacency is the enemy of progress.
Sure.
And so, I mean, as soon as you're comfortable and complacent, that desire to push yourself dissipates. And so the very fact that every day is a new day with a new challenge to improve on tomorrow is probably an attitude that if we could bottle and sell to young musicians, would be phenomenally wealthy.
I was outside the Ruth Eckerd Hall listening and I was sitting on the back concrete steps and I was on a phone call and I hear a guitar player playing some tunes and it's really good and there's an accompaniment like I couldn't quite pick out what the percussion was, but it's man, that is grooving, you know what I mean? And that was you.
That was me. Yeah, look at that. Yeah.
You
Thanks.
know?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
tell you a story. So when I first met Jeff many, many, many years ago, he saw me play. I was 18, and
Oh,
his comment was, I was too nervous to even talk to him. And his comment to me was, "You have great pocket." So
yeah.
when I saw you behind Ruth Eckerd Hall, and then when we were chatting afterwards, and you went, "Oh, that was you." He says,
Yeah.
your comment was, "You got great pocket."
Yeah.
And so to me, all of a sudden, I'd gone the full circle of Toto drummers. And I was like, okay, well, I can go home. All is good now.
Well,
So,
you know, the interesting thing about that, and then we can kind of touch, maybe it's worth addressing. It's like back to that thing about who it is we're connecting with and what about them that we connect with that's behind the instrument. I've run into so many bizarre situations where language I had no, I mean, specific and sort of irregular language to describe something I would use in a sequence of words were the exact same sequence of words he used on something. It's not saying I'm the same as him. It's saying that whatever we're tapped into is coming from the same place.
that's pretty deep, I think. But,
But I think that is the reality. That's why the Porcaro family never treated me like with a raised eyebrow, like who's this guy trying to mimic Jeff? You know what I mean? Like they understood a certain difference there and always made sure I understood that they knew it.
well, I was lucky enough to know Joe a little bit. Has there ever been a classier family in the music
No,
industry? Has there ever been one?
no, no, absolutely. Like the patriarch of that community out there, sort of the arbiter of what is cool.
No, 100%. All right. So listen, we've talked a little bit about your successes, but we all know the music industry is rife with challenges. What sort of challenges have you faced? And I know this is elite, but I'm going to assume, how have you managed to address and overcome those?
Well, right now the ongoing conundrum and I just condition, because musicians we can fall into this pitiful place where like something is being taken from us or we deserve a certain thing for something. And when you put music into a situation where you want to see commercialize it and monetize it, then there comes a host of other factors. It's like what's important to people? What are the conditions of the industry? What are you know what I mean? And some of these things that look like monstrosities in equitable business situations that are precluding artists from being able to make any money, they're just the conditions. I think we tend to lose sight on is how exceedingly rare the kind of success we all aspire to actually is. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about Jeff Porcaro posthumously 30 years later. And there's not like a list of guys that have come in and stamped their name down like you know what I mean? And some of that's because the conditions changed, you know what I mean? And more the nature of the music changed with this thing or the other, but there's always a lateral offset to everything. The inability to monetize or the clogged up, pathway to get your music in front of people seems like there's so much additional participation than there was, and that is true. But at the same time, the platform to get on there with everyone else is just it's at arm's reach. You know what I mean? And so then you're back to a certain zero, and so if everybody can, then you're going to have to do something different than everyone else is, the same as it ever was. You know what I mean? But the way that you can support and help kind of overcome the problem, I think, is purchasing people's music when the opportunity is there. You know, the streaming situation and social media has become a problem all the way down into all levels of trying to gig, you know, because you have this situation where social media becomes the qualifier for even at a club level. Can you get a gig? You know, can you get an opportunity to play? Well, now there's, you know, maybe 1,000 people in your local area that have social media accounts, and who knows if they can even play at all. You know what I mean? Because what goes on there is post editing, and maybe they can't play in public at all, but maybe their follower count is driven by a bunch of paid for followers, and you know what I mean? And you have all this content, and so it's breaking down the system to be able to get in front of people. I mean, and that's ultimately still what it comes down to. Can you get in a room and play some music and leave a lasting enough impression on someone that they'll come back or they'll look you up on there, you know? I mean, that's probably not an answer. I'm searching for that answer because I have a project of my own that I'm deeply invested in. And it's the great difficulty is not getting approval. You know, we've gotten the greatest feedback throughout the industry, you know, for the merit of what it is, like blowing people's minds back, but they only operate on the metrics of these social media and streaming numbers, which are just, it's not worth the time and effort, you know, at this point. It might have worked a little bit 10 years ago, but there's so much more participation on these platforms that you can't make a dent. Tapping into your own voice, your own personality, and making sure that comes through the way you play or the way you write, whatever you're creating. You have to really make sure that yours can be recognized different amongst all the others that are out there. It's the only way you can turn it into something. I mean, it's supply and demand. These are simple. That's why I say they're conditions. I don't get all caught up in philosophy and ideology and art and all these precious things. It's like, well, no, these are the conditions. And the first thing you have to do is really focus hard on making sure you are identifiable uniquely against everything else that's out there.
In dealing with these things, you don't have a manager, right? A personal manager. I know Toto has management, but you don't have a
No,
personal manager.
no, and even I haven't met a useful one in the last 30 years. You know what I mean? I have um, a very sort of fleeting acknowledgement, if you will, with Irving Azoff. You know what I mean? And that guy is obviously somebody that's been around forever. But most managers are used car salesmen that are, you know, they have a certain personality trait that artists a lot of times don't have, can't even bust through. They know what it's worth because really, so this social media stuff doesn't get you anywhere. You have to have an industrial partner, and they're going, huh, okay, well, if it's worth, how much is it worth to you? So it's another difficult thing to try to navigate.
I've seen that twice in the last year.
Yeah,
Clients have sent me management contracts where the manager wants an equal share with every band member, including of publishing, copyright, and everything else. And you know, maybe it's the old-fashioned musician in me, but you know, my position has always been that's a no-starter, right? I'm
yeah,
not even willing to discuss it.
yeah.
Um, you know, and frankly, it's everything's about leverage, and you know, if you're going to hire a manager, that manager better be somebody that is not leveraging you.
Right. And that's the difficulty. The things that I saw right up close is got, I want this guy to make a hard-nosed phone call to this label executive because this something is breaking down here that shouldn't be that way. It's like, well, he's not going to crawl up that guy for me because he's got to call that guy back with a different artist tomorrow. You know what I mean? So it's really, you know, it's a tough scenario, and all that stuff has kind of amassed its power to a point where I mean, I think anything is as possible as it ever was, but I think right now they've sort of broken the thing. They've broken the machine, you know, and so it's waiting for somebody to you know, reinvent it.
The solution is within us, you know, within the
Yeah,
musicians and
that's
within
right.
the successful pop folks. I think, you know, respect for other musicians, treating people kindly, helping those on the way up, and helping to push the industry to acknowledge talent, not sales. And that's a real hard sell because, you know, for the labels and for other folks, it all boils down to the mighty dollar. But, you know, you hear a lot of people saying the music today is not as good as the music it was in the 70s and, you know, the magical years, 1974. I don't believe that for a moment. I just believe it's harder to find. There's just as much quality information. There's just as much quality music, but it's drowning in a sea of mediocrity that, you know, so sometimes you just can't find it.
That's right. And that is volume is a problem. Participation is a problem. And you just kind of hit on the thing that I was alluding to, which is it comes from inside us, you know. And the one thing that I think is I keep saying on repeat is music is about communication. It's about what the artist has to say. It starts there. The other component, the third rail, and the more important one to the layman who's not a musician is what the artist was about, you know, like you can draw an understanding of who that person is and what it means to you. That requires more than a set of tools that enable you to make sound real easily. It's a deeper dive inward, and that's what you say, it's inside ourselves, and that's actually the truth of it. I think the only thing that's missing, as far as I can tell, when I hear some things, even when I hear some things that are artistically creative, they're not saying anything. I don't, they've not found a new way to either talk, even if it's a love song or whatever you will, they're not moving the language and the context forward at all. And so when you have the music based on, you know, all the trappings of what has already been, and then intellectually, all the imagery and association is based on everything that you've heard, and you're just recomposing, you know, the same ideas. You have to bring a component of what is the state of the human condition right now and say those things in a way that's proportionally relevant. Because all that stuff then that we know and love in the cultural moments that they were in, they were spoken in the time that they were in. And now, just like everything else, because everything we're so willfully accepting as an industry of replication or even regurgitation, you know what I mean? You become 3 and 4 times removed from the source, you know, and it's that what you said is exactly the answer. It is inside. You have to be willing to go deeper in. The real artists that we know about, you know, for lack of a better term, they exposed themselves, you know, and a lot of people want to be heard, but they don't want to be exposed, you know, and so you got to look there. Whether you're a player or, you know what I mean, you have to go to that vulnerable spot. That's, you know, it's easy to learn to play. I put it this way, I worked with an artist that I was very impressed with, and then I ultimately kind of had to walk away from the things because you can become so skilled, you can work so hard at skill that you're not afraid to get on a stage, you know? You can be so prepared as a vocalist or a player that you can play fearless of a mistake or even ridicule. But the real fear is about what if they don't like what I have to say? You know what I mean? And that's the propulsion mechanism of all of this, I think.
We got to we
Right,
got to be
very
brave.
bold.
We got to, you know, being generic can sometimes be a coward's way out, right? But I understand why people do it because they think to themselves, well, hold on, this is what's popular, right? But
Yeah,
as I tell folks, listen, if you don't make it in this career, if you don't, you'll never ever second guess yourself if you are authentic, right? But if you
right.
weren't, you're going to spend your future going,
What if I would
I
have?
wish, yeah, what
That's
if I
right.
would have?
And so you're right. I mean, you said it first, you know, it's inside, and it sounds like it's no help to. So of course it is. It's like, well, I mean, how much of that are you really doing? You know, that's where the work is internal, you know, and I do believe if you do that, there will be an opportunity.
I think you're right. But you know, the one beautiful, marvelous, consistent thing about the music industry is the music, right?
Yeah.
The one thing that has never changed back
Mhm.
from however far you want to go back, the thing that inspires us as humans and as emotional creatures is the beauty of the music that is often put onto record by people that can really play. And that's never going to change. And the music is still the thing that's going to keep us emotionally up, right? And you're lucky enough that you played on a lot of those records with those guys that play that stuff. So as we end this interview and we think about that, there are young musicians, college age, younger, slightly older, who are trying to get there. What can we tell them about the power of the music to help them reach their goals, to help them find those dreams where they can express themselves in a way which resonates and leads to a better universe?
Trust that your personality, and if you're able to bring that into an instrument, is more important than the technical precision of playing. Being able to express your personality through anything you put in your hands, that was what will make you unique and give you value. And then of course, you know, depending on what that voice is, then you have to refine the technique of the instrument. And those things are supposed to be reciprocal. They require each other. You know what I mean? The desire to be heard in a more particular way will make you work harder on the technique required to express that with the most clarity, the most force, you know. But it really is that. It's just it's all inside, and you know, and understanding that your unique personality is more important than the instrument.
So put in the time to give voice to your heart.
Yes, perfectly said.
Hey man, listen, it's always fantastic to chat with you. I truly appreciate your time. I know it's getting late where you are. Thanks for your time, Shannon. We are honored to have you. Thanks very much. Appreciate you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. My pleasure.
Don Famularo here, the Sessions panel. This is so exciting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Click the subscribe button to be a part of what we're doing. The views help us tremendously. All of your comments, we read them and react to them. This is incredible. The support you're giving us is great. The Sessions panel. We'll see you real soon.